It's the Geeky Waffle Podcast.
Today we are talking about The Rings of Power Season 2. I'm Arezou, and with me is our Wormhole Waffles host and my bestie, Candace. Not Candace, Jesus Christ.
Oh my God.
Chelsea. I'm so used to saying Candace is with me for Space Waffles. Chelsea!
Hi. Very rude.
I'm so sorry. I slipped in the tongue. I fully was like, don't say Candace. Don't say Candace. This isn't Space Waffles. And Candace came out anyway. So
well, she's here with us in spirit.
She's here with us in spirit. And apparently always on my mind. Anyway, wow. After saying you're my bestie too, I swear you are my bestie. But listen, it's fine. I threw myself off. We are talking about The Rings of Power Season 2 today. So Chelsea did all of the recaps for the Geeky Waffle, and if you haven't read those, you should definitely go back and check them out, because if you find yourself in need of updates on the lore, I guess, and you're not like me, just surviving on vibes and good times, then that's definitely the place to be. So let's talk Season 2. So before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to know what your overall thoughts on the season were.
I loved it a lot. I mean, I've seen a lot of people online being like, oh, Season 2 was such an improvement on Season 1. I'm like, honestly, I love them both. I mean, I don't think Season 1 did anything wrong at all necessarily. But so Season 2 for me is just continuing the fun. I've really enjoyed it. And this show has made me want to get into the lore of Tolkien a lot more, because before, I mean, I've been like a watcher of Lord of the Rings and stuff for a long time, but it wasn't until watching the show, like after the first season, I read the Silmarillion for the first time, and writing my reviews for this show, I'm like, on the wiki researching for literally hours. And so I think there is definitely something to be said about whether you more like or more dislike the show. It is bringing in a lot of new viewers to the Tolkien world in general, to Middle Earth, and sparking an interest for a lot of people who didn't have one before or who weren't as into it as they are now. So I think it's done quite a lot for the fandom.
I would agree. I think it's bringing in a lot of audiences, because we did have the Lord of the Rings movies when we were in middle school, and The Hobbit shortly after. And I think being the beasts of a movie that they are, and as long as they are, I feel like they're a big commitment to ask of people for a movie. But I think for a series, like something of this length is a more reasonable ask. And I also find that I joked about vibes and good times, but really my interest in this is whether or not it holds up on its own, kind of removed from having that extra knowledge. And I would say that it's definitely interesting to have the knowledge of like Tolkien's writings in there to sort of do what you do and try to predict where this is going. But even if you don't have it, I think it holds up remarkably well.
Absolutely.
Because I have read the Lord of the Rings. I tried to read them in middle school. I made it as far as the end of Two Towers, and when I think I'm done. And then read them properly in university, read them all the way through. But that's it. That's the only time I read them. So I still love the world, love the movies, and I really enjoy the show. I do think Season 2 was different in tone to Season 1. I think it kind of had to be.
Yeah, I do like the way that the show is making this world more accessible to the fandom, because the books are dense. They're very dense, and I do not blame anyone who does not have the energy to read them, because it's a lot.
The only way I could get through them was, because I own them, but the only way I could get through it was getting the large print versions from the library. For some reason, that made it easier to read, but they are extremely dense. They're long. The style is not the style of current fantasy novels, or current fiction doesn't flow in the same way. So if even if you're a big reader and you're coming from a more contemporary reading list, it's an adjustment. Not impossible, but an adjustment.
I would also recommend listening to them on audiobook if you're struggling to get through them. That's how I got through the Silmarillion, because it reads more like a history book, and it can be very dry at times, but listening to an audiobook with a good narrator really helps with that. So I think that Andy Serkis narrating new versions of the audiobooks recently.
I know he did The Hobbit. Did he also do Lord of the Rings?
I think he might be making his way through all of them.
Yeah, you're right. I'm so behind. The last time I heard was The Hobbit. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, it looks like he's got all of them. Yeah, so I haven't listened to them yet, but I would imagine that he's a good narrator.
yeah, that I would listen to.
Uh-huh.
I find fantasy a bit tricky in audio because
Yes.
a lot of things I'm very visual, so
Mhm.
if the word is confusing, I will have a
Yes.
hard time. But it's also not new to me, The Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings. So
Yeah, that too.
maybe that would help.
Or even like what I did with Game of Thrones was I listened to the audiobooks and then I read detailed chapter summaries online so that way I could see how names were spelled.
Hmm.
So that's something that you can also do with The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's a good call. Okay, so do you want to take this, I guess, arc by arc, plot by plot,
Yeah,
rather than
sure.
go episode by episode? So
Yeah.
where do you want to start?
I want to start with my favorite people, which is, well, now we have him finally named Gandalf and the Halflings.
Let's do it.
They're
So
amazing.
before we jump into their story arc, I know maybe you saw this, maybe you didn't, but there was a bit of back and forth with the showrunners about whether the stranger was actually Gandalf. Because at the end of season 1, he says this bit to Nori about always follow. I keep want to say follow your nose, but then I keep thinking that that's like the Fruit Loops mascot. So maybe it's also Gandalf too. But he had this
Yeah.
line at the end of season 1, and everyone's like, "Oh, that must be Gandalf because Gandalf
Yeah.
has said that before."
Yeah.
And then the showrunners are like, "Is it Gandalf? Is it Sauron who maybe said that to Gandalf?" And at the end, it's like, "No, that was in fact Gandalf the whole time."
Yeah. They were just teasing
Um,
us.
did you ever waver on the belief that this was Gandalf? Did you believe that it was Gandalf before we got the confirmation?
In season 1, I kept an open mind, but when it got to the end of season 1, I was like, that's got to be him. Like, that's the only thing that makes sense. I was pretty confident at the end of season 1 that that was him.
So let's talk about the stranger slash Harfoot arc. So they do wind up separating about halfway through before coming back
Mhm.
together. But
I love the development. I mean, obviously, the only two Harfoots that we see are Nori and Poppy, but then we get to meet the Stores, who are
mhm,
really cool. And I just find it so fascinating to see the different aspects of halfling cultures because at this point they're not technically hobbits yet because
no,
they're not a unified group. Right now there are 3 groups and one of which we haven't seen on the show yet. I want to say they're the fallow feet, maybe? It starts with an F, I'm pretty sure. But in any case, there are 3 of these groups, and we know the Harfoots are migratory, and now we've got the Stores who have fixed homes. And so you can see elements from both in how later Hobbit culture will arise when they all come together.
mhm.
So yeah, it's just fascinating to see different aspects of that.
Yeah. I will admit I was initially confused in season 1 as to why they were called Harfoots and not hobbits, and like just
Mhm.
because they were migratory doesn't mean they're not hobbits. And
Yeah.
then my brain was like, maybe they're the hair equivalent to like a hobbit being a rabbit, and like they're almost the
Oh.
same but not quite. And like, are they going to meet up with the hobbits? And then I realized that I keep forgetting that this is significantly before the events of Lord of the Rings, so things
Uh-huh.
have time to change.
Yes, exactly. I mean, speaking to the lore, this is like thousands of years before that. So there's definitely a lot of time for things to develop. Of course, they are massively condensing that for the show. And I think at first, in the first season, I was a little annoyed with that. But then I kind of came to realize that's just what makes sense. You can't possibly do a streaming show like this and actually have things play out in real time because it does happen over thousands of years. You know,
Mhm.
this is it's supposed to be covering the entire second age, which is I think like close to like 3,000 years. You know, so I mean there's just no way that you could cover that amount of time in an efficient way without condensing everything.
Yeah, I would agree. Like the timeline thing never bothered me per se. I just kind of kept forgetting it was an issue because
Yeah.
I know that it's very hard sell to have some characters like the elves or whatever remain the same throughout the run of your series, and then have the humans and those who don't live as long rotate out every 2 episodes because 100 years has
Yeah,
passed. Like you can't.
absolutely.
But anyway, we meet the stores with Nori and Poppy, and they're kind of fun. I like their I like their sense of, there's a conversation that Nori has with the leader of the stores, Gunda Bale.
Yeah.
Blanking on the pronunciation of her name.
They called her like the Gund.
But this conversation that Nori has with her about how, like, well, home is your community, and I don't understand, like, calling a place home when home is like who you're with. And she's like, yeah, but home is your history too, and home is like your roots, and we have roots planted here. And there's something to be said for both, that at the end of the day, yes, being in a place where your roots are planted completely by yourself does not make it home, but also having a place to call your own. I just love that whole conversation, because I'm like, it's one of those things that the show does so well. It's like nobody is wrong.
Right.
So
in general, I think a sense of home is important for literally every group in this show, because we have like Adar with the Uruk trying to find a good home for them, and we have Celebrimbor's home being demolished, and we have some similar types of things developing in Khazad-dûm. So I mean, this people's sense of home is being
questioned.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the stores lose their home in this season also. I mean, there's just all kinds, like every single group is losing some kind of home. So that'll be interesting to see in future seasons if they kind of turn that on its head and help people find new homes.
Yeah, because at the end of the season, like this being a theme for everybody's sense of home is upended. And I think it wasn't the case at the end of season 1. It was very much the question of, we are going to fight to preserve what we have.
Yeah.
And now it feels like we're going to fight to regain what we lost.
Yeah, exactly.
For everybody. So I think it's such a, I feel like and I'm guilty of this a bit too, but I feel like the Harfoot side of the story really gets overlooked. Because it's much quieter than the big bombastic battles happening everywhere else. But the theme of the season is really distilled very well.
Yeah.
With them.
I think so too. Yeah, I mean, they're my favorite group, so of course I don't think they got enough screen time.
They did it. They did a lot of screen time.
Yeah. And I think they got significantly more screen time in the first season because we had to establish who they were as a people. And so I was a little sour on the fact that they seemed not totally forgotten about, but just certainly pushed aside, especially because in season 1, we had the stranger with the Harfoots together, and now that their storylines are starting to separate, then we get even less time with the Harfoots in the stores. And I just looked up, the third group are called the Fallowhides.
Fallowhides, there we go.
Yeah.
I wonder now that they've gone their separate way fully from the stranger now, or from Gandalf, who is off with Tom Bombadil, and he's singing songs by the fire, and he's ready to learn magic. I wonder now that those are completely separate, and their plot is no longer functioning in any relation to Gandalf's plot, whether that means we're going to get more time with them, or we're going to get even less time with them.
Probably less time. I mean, I think in the long run, they would eventually come back together again, because I think it would be depressing not only for us as an audience, but for them as characters to never see each other again.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the showrunners would do that, but I think that there is probably going to be some separation in the next season, and that's probably going to mean less screen time for them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because of course, like Gandalf, with his big name reveal, is going to be probably more and more important as the show goes on, and the Harfoots less so.
I wonder, as a final musing on this side of stories, is that we see them come face to face with somebody called the Dark Wizard, but who does not claim this title for himself. It's the name they've given him. We don't know who he is. We know he's one of the Istar, one of these 5 wizards that eventually make their way to Middle Earth. And he's not Gandalf, so he's one of the other 4. His beard is very Saruman-like.
Yes.
But that doesn't necessarily mean he's Saruman. He could be one of the blue wizards, probably not Radagast. But do we think he's Saruman?
Well, He definitely has a much better chance of being Saruman than Radagast. There's 0% chance he's Radagast because Radagast is just this little guy who likes to walk through the woods and like talk to plants and animals, much like Tom Bombadil. You know, they have very similar preferences in life. And I don't think there's any remote chance that it's Radagast.
No, I don't think so either.
But then, like with the blue wizards, we know almost nothing about them. So that gives the showrunners a lot of room to be creative with it. But then again, it's like they're playing this balance between using familiar characters and bringing in brand new characters. Because, you know, you have all your heavy hitters like Galadriel and Elrond and, you know, the dwarves, but then you have bringing in Adar and bringing in the Harfoots and characters who aren't like explicitly in the established lore. And so you kind of have to think about too, for this wizard, are they going to bring in somebody new, or are they more likely to bring in a character that we're already a little bit familiar with? So I think I feel like it's probably more likely to be Saruman just because we know that he does eventually turn to Sauron's side, and we know that he is cunning and deceitful. But, you know, we're not really going to know for a while.
Yeah.
So I think for sure, I think if it is Saruman, he's going to realize from his encounter with Gandalf that he needs to play the long game, and he needs to truly shed this image that he's been given as a dark wizard and be seen as a light wizard, even if that's not what he truly is on the inside. I think he's going to realize that he would need to put on a show, at least, of being a light wizard and the white wizard. And in order to fool not only Gandalf, but fool everyone before eventually revealing what's truly in his heart, as we've seen in Lord of the Rings. So I think it's probably more likely just because it's a familiar character and we kind of know his game.
Mm-hmm.
But who's to say? It could be a blue wizard.
Yeah. My inclination of him being Sauron is purely, one, the aesthetic, and two, I think given the choice between a familiar character and a new character, they would probably just default to familiar.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking too.
Because this isn't a fan servicey show in the sense that they're doing things so that you can point at the screen and be like, oh my God, I know what that is.
Yeah.
This is not that kind of show. It's one of those things where if you know what that is, that rewards you for knowing it. But if you don't know what that is, that's totally fine. And I think making him Saruman does have that element of, oh my God, it's Saruman. I know who that is, but also would make sense for this to be Saruman. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they take that. And interesting to see how much more we see of Tom Bombadil as well.
He was great. Like, I do remember Tom Bombadil from the book, and I also know they cut him out of the movies, which I think makes sense. You just need to
There's just so many characters.
You just kind of, at that point in the story, just kind of need to get going.
Yep.
You can't stop and be like, here's this guy who talks to trees. Like, you just need to keep it moving.
Yeah.
But given that they had time to have him here, I think that the way it was done, like the character and the way he was doing, it was done really well.
One thing that is nice about a show being able to bring up some of these kind of sort of more minor characters is makes me wonder, like, if they're going to introduce Tom Bombadil, if they're also going to introduce Radagast, and then also, I don't remember his name, but there's that guy who can turn into a bear. That would be cool.
Who?
Hold on, let me find his name.
I'm just thinking of the guy from Baldur's Gate 3, and that can't be what you're talking about.
Bjorn. Okay. Yeah. He's one. So, like, whenever Frodo and Sam, they're traveling through on their way towards Rivendell, you know, they come across Tom Bombadil and they come across various people. They meet the Eagles, I think, briefly. But then also Bjorn. They come to Bjorn's house and he is really standoffish at first because he doesn't like strangers. But then he decides to help them, and I think he saves them from getting attacked by turning into his bear form. And he's a cool character. So it'd be really fun to see him in the show.
I have no memory of this.
Yeah. There's lots of like random people along the way that essentially are people that want to mind their own business, but
Mhm.
don't mind helping out if they're in the area. So he's kind of one of those two.
This
And
show
because
is a good home for them.
yeah, exactly. Because that's kind of Tom Bombadil's thing too, is he's more or less a personification of nature itself. And so he cares about plants and animals, and that's about it. And it's like, if you're in the area and you need help, he'll help you. But otherwise, he's not like super concerned about stuff. Like, sure, he doesn't like Sauron and what he's doing, but he's also not going out of his way to do anything about it necessarily.
Yeah.
But when the hobbits come along and they need help, then he helps them. So it'd be interesting to see if we get some more like cameos of these like more minor characters that pop up in the books that we didn't have time for in the Lord of the Rings movies, because there's only so much you can show with such an epic story.
Yeah, and it sounds funny to say something like The Lord of the Rings is limited in time, but it was
Mhm.
for a movie. It does have
Yeah.
a time limit. Do you have anything else you want to say about this corner of the story?
I don't think so.
All right. So let's talk about the dwarves next.
Mm-hmm.
Lot of drama with them. We've got King Durin, who has his ring of power, and
Uh-huh.
it has immediately corrupted him. Absolutely no waiting,
Mhm.
instant corruption.
Mhm. But what I love about the dwarves' corruption is that it's not going to be the same as the men's corruption.
Yes.
That's fantastic, because essentially it being that the dwarves are so strong of character that the only thing that the rings do to them is make them greedy for more gold.
And it brings out something that was perhaps in there, but like better instinct and
Mhm.
judgment and listening to those around you kind of keeps that suppressed.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Mhm. But it doesn't make them evil by any
No,
means.
not evil. Just I think we all have. They basically let the intrusive thoughts win. Like we've all
Yeah.
got
Mhm.
aspects of ourselves that we kind of keep on lock. We don't
Mhm.
really, bring it out to play much, but the rings kind of don't give them much of a choice.
Exactly. And the elven rings are essentially never corrupted because Sauron never had a chance to work on them at all.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really the only ones that are free, not like 100% free of its influence, but like moderately free of his influence. Whereas it's like the 9 rings for men are completely corrupt their wearers and turn them evil. So
I don't know if this was the intent or just kind of how it read to me, but just thinking about the levels of corruption in the dwarven rings and then the eventual 9 that the men will get, is that the ones for the dwarves feel like a long game corruption.
yes.
Like it's just playing on what's already in them and kind of their instinct as it stands, and then down the line it's going to cause such corruption that it destabilizes the kingdom and kind of makes things easier for Sauron, whereas the 9 rings of men are basically the nothing left to lose corruption. Like we're instantly as corrupt as you can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know how intentional that was, or if that's just kind of how it wound up playing out.
Yeah, because with the dwarves, obviously, we've talked about how the show condenses things. They're supposed to be 11 more generations after Prince Durin that the Balrog actually destroys enough of Khazad-dûm to drive the dwarves out of it. So that corruption is very slow and building. So they get greedier and greedier for more gold and mithril, and are mining for more things. But then the same thing is happening in other dwarven kingdoms too. And so they end up getting displaced. They go to the Lonely Mountain. They, go to different places. And so, yeah, that is definitely the long game when it comes to corruption, for sure.
I've loved them since the beginning. I kind of think I'd misunderstood the nature of their relationship going into the show. But since the beginning, I've loved Durin and Disa.
Absolutely.
I think couple goals.
They
are so great.
Disa is easily in my top 3 characters.
Oh, 100%. I love the way she is allowed in this season, in season 1, but more in this season. She's kind of allowed to have these moments of vulnerability that are never played as making her less of a character, that never play off as making her dependent on her husband. It's none of that. It's just somebody who is having a vulnerable moment and who's being supported in that vulnerable moment.
Yep.
Which is so much rarer than I would like it to be.
Yeah, and because we talk about the dwarves being strong, not only of body, but of mind. But we only have ever seen dwarven men on screen, like in the Lord of the Rings. I think even
Mhm.
in the Hobbit movies, I'm not sure if we ever saw any
We
dwarven
don't.
women. And it's like, obviously, they're strong as a people. It's not just the men who have this mental fortitude, it's obviously also the women. And we need to see that. And I'm so glad that we have Disa because she is such a powerhouse. And every single scene that she's in, I'm like, yes, more, more.
Exactly. She's so great. She's
Mhm.
and then too, like Durin, because I this is where I confess that I only saw the first two of the three Hobbit movies and I never made it to the third one. But the dwarves to me, not Thorin, Thorin had his own thing going on, but the dwarves, everybody else, to me, sort of felt like they were the lighter part of the movies.
Yeah.
There was the broodiness going on with the larger plot and
Mhm.
Thorin's story and all of that. But the dwarves as a collective
Mhm.
felt like the comedy part. And Gimli
Right.
also kind of felt more of the comedy part
Mhm.
in Lord of the Rings. Whereas, yeah, Durin's pretty funny and he does have his moments because
Mhm.
he wears his emotions right on the surface,
Yep.
never heard of a filter and is not inclined to ever get one.
No.
But at the same time, he, like Disa, has these moments where he is extremely vulnerable. That
Yeah.
whole conversation about her going, well, we should just forcibly depose your dad and have him basically declared insane. And he's like, you realize what you're asking me to do to my father. Like, I
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yep.
And it's, yeah, just he has these moments that just make him so well-rounded
Mhm.
because they let him be vulnerable and all that.
Exactly. The show is giving them more of a voice because the main Lord of the Rings story is all about the central cast, which only includes a single dwarf, whereas we meet so many elves along the way, so many men along the way, and one dwarf is not enough.
Yeah. So it kind of gives us a bit more of a sense of how they're and they, like Numenor, are the two kind of communities that feel really lived in.
Yeah.
We can talk about Numenor next, but just the way that they have things like home furnishings and a
Mhm.
marketplace and various
Mhm.
industries, and just when it pans out and you see all of Khazad-dûm, it looks truly like a city people live in,
Right. Yeah.
as opposed to the
They're so
elven realms
polished.
are very polished. They look like little huts in the woods
Uh-huh.
that are not like where do they grocery shop? They don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
But
That's true.
like the dwarves have a market where the shopkeepers have to mark things up to pay taxes, and like
Mhm.
Numenor has cafes and restaurants and stores and market squares and things like that, whereas the other ones don't seem to quite. So
Yep.
I really appreciate that about them as well.
Me too.
Anything else about the dwarves?
Just that I love them and need more.
Correct. And hopefully we'll get more because
Mhm.
the season ends for them with King Durin dead.
Oh my god, that scene was probably the most visually stunning scene in the entire season.
Where he
When
jumps
King
for the
Dur
Balrog and the
Uh-huh.
thing just closes on this shot of him
Yep.
axe wielding in the air. So, like, such a powerful shot.
It was. That's gonna stick with me for a long time. Because with the battles are like epic and grand, and they're doing all these things, and there's like special effects, blah blah blah. But I don't know, sometimes battles just are not totally boring, but just not quite as interesting to me
They
as
also do
some of the
not hold
other
my
stuff.
interest. Don't worry.
Yeah, and so but with the Balrog, I was like, that is just so visually captivating. It really like holds you in the scene.
Hmm.
So I love that.
So, yeah, now with the king dead, Durin's got, like, Prince Durin has this question of does he take the ring?
Hmm.
He promised Issa he wouldn't, but now he's got questions of succession around
Hmm.
him, and that he apparently has a brother we didn't know about, or I didn't know about.
Yeah.
So some people are saying he's the rightful heir, even though we know that King Durin named him his heir right before he
Hmm.
died. Nobody else heard that. So
Yeah. I mean,
that's all up in the air now.
we get a little shot that he apparently still has all of the rings that are meant to go to the other dwarven lords and other groups. And so I'm assuming that means he's going to use those as political leverage to get his throne.
But then I wonder if that he's not going to not wear the ring then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things like in lore, that ring stays in the family and gets passed on from king to king for the next 11 generations. So there's that. But then also, we don't necessarily get a lot of nitty gritty about it. It's in his possession, technically speaking, but does that mean he wears it all the time? Not necessarily.
Right. So there's hope, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Perhaps next we should talk about Numenor, because I mentioned them and I adore them.
Yes. That's great.
So Pharazôn and his son need to be thrown into the river.
Absolutely.
Expeditiously.
Feed them to the sea worm.
Feed them to the sea. So Numenor doesn't get a ton of screen time, and I think the reason they got as much as they did last season was because they were so heavily entwined with what the elves had going on.
Mm-hmm.
But their whole thing is basically just a little question of political upheaval with Pharazôn's really well-timed coup, meaning that he can take over Muriel's throne. So him being like, the eagle has chosen me, therefore I'm king. I'm like, if you had waited like 30 seconds, the eagle would have chosen Muriel. I'm pretty sure.
Right? Yeah. Like, does the eagle even know?
The eagle doesn't know. The eagle's like, I was supposed to show up at 3:15.
And I showed up. Yeah.
Here I am. But this is my favorite part of the plot because it's the most like period drama politic-y.
Mm-hmm.
Because the city feels lived in, and also because this is where my ship is. So
yes.
you knew that was coming. But I'm down very bad for Elendil and Muriel.
Uh-huh.
I've been told that this is not going to go well. You told me this won't go well.
Oh no, it definitely won't go well.
I've decided I don't care.
I mean, in general, Muriel's story is sad.
What if it wasn't? What if it ends well this time?
Yeah.
It could.
I mean, the show can change things if they want.
If
but
they condense the timeline, they can give me a happy ever after. My thing with this plot is I'm just really excited to see where it goes, because this felt like a lot of setup to like bigger political dealio in season 3.
Yeah.
Because it ends with Elendil gone with Narsil in hand. Muriel has been turned over to Pharazôn's custody. Kemen is setting up a Numenorian outpost in Middle Earth, despite I think you said this, that despite the entire political platform of Pharazôn's rule being like, we shouldn't have gotten involved in Middle Earth. They're like, what if we?
Oh my god, he's such a hypocrite. His entire platform was Muriel's decision to go to Middle Earth was bad and wrong, and so many people died that didn't need to die, and so we're not going to do that. And then what does he do? He sets up an outpost. Like,
he's like, and she's looking into the Palantir, and it's bad. And meanwhile,
and then he
what
did
is he doing? Like, he is nothing but a hypocrite. I hate him so much. I don't think I've ever hated him. I don't hate Sauron as much as I hate him. So,
I don't know. I think I hate Kemen more than Pharazôn.
That's true. I do hate Kemen more than Pharazôn.
Because at least Pharazôn is intelligent.
I hate them both because they have this like smug, know-it-all face. Kemen's is worse. And also Kemen's younger and therefore likely to live longer. So I hate him more.
Yeah. But like where Pharazôn at least knows when to restrain himself, Kemen is just all passion and he acts immediately on his feelings. And it's like, that's gonna get you killed, buddy. Like,
Kemen has never had a rational thought in his life.
No.
So he gets to Pelargir and he sees that Isildur is still alive. Pretends to be happy about it. But
it's clearly not happy about
it. But this is all obviously going to blow up in his face when he gets back to Numenor. Because Isildur's sister, Eärien, her whole purpose for siding with Pharazôn is that she's mad at Muriel for sending people to Middle Earth.
Yep.
Which I would, first of all, remind her that they volunteered to go. And I understand the grief of it all, but come on. And also, just speaking of hypocrisy, she just fits in so well with this party, because she like watches him basically out loud call an entire religious order traitors. And she's like, okay, you can kill all of them, but as long as my daddy's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you
It's not-
think you're doing the heroic thing? You're really not.
No. Yeah. I'm fascinated to see if she goes back and changes sides again when she finds out that Isildur is alive.
I think she's going to try to get Isildur to side with her.
Oh, for sure.
But like on Farazan's side. And he's going to be
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, but then when he's like, no, F that, I'm going to go meet Dad in the West, I'm interested to see if she'll follow or not.
I don't know that I trust her enough to follow. But
I'm
I
not
don't
sure that
know.
I don't know that I trust her to follow necessarily, but family is important to her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see her, and she seems easily swayed, so I could see her being swayed back towards her family side.
I almost wonder if they're going to like force her into marriage to Kemen. This was my thought. Because he didn't seem happy Isildur was coming back because that's the only way his little incel ass can hang out with Aryan in the first place.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if they're going to kind of to unite that family, that old family,
Right.
with theirs and to legitimize it a bit if she's going to have to marry Kemen.
I don't know.
This is what I mean when I say it's all like this period drama politic-y, is that this is what that side of the plot feels like.
Mm-hmm. It was strange to me when I saw Kemen show up in Pelargir because historically Pelargir was always a city for Numenorians who were the faithful.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that the opposite political group is now coming in to take over makes me wonder if that's going to be very short-lived, and maybe the people who are currently in Pelargir are going to, have a bit of an uprising against Kemen and his guards and whatnot. I mean, that'll be interesting to see.
I honestly feel like Kemen is so unlikable that it wouldn't take very much to sway his guards to join them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But then again, I'm not sure that he actually stayed. I think he might have just been coming to set up rules and then he was going back home.
That's what I mean. But because he's the commander of the outpost, I imagine he'll come back.
Yeah.
And at that point, it probably won't take much to like remind the guards that he's actually pretty damn annoying.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it continues to be a major port city for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So
there we
we'll
go.
see. We'll see it grow up. Right now, it looks kind of ragtag, but it's going to grow up into a big port city.
Wouldn't it be nice if it was inaugurated by throwing Kemen directly into the sea?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay. We've been talking about Pelargir, so let's talk about the former Southlands residents, and then we can hop over to those pesky elves. So, R.I.P. Bronwyn.
Yeah.
One of my favorite characters from the first season, who was killed off immediately because the actor had retired from acting for a while to focus on real life activism, so I can't even be that mad about it.
No, I'm not mad about the actor's decision. I'm sad because Bronwyn was great.
I was talking about this with a friend, and I do think kind of they had that choice. Do you recast Bronwyn and just keep going, or do you kill her off and kind of mine that dramatic potential? And I'm like, given the choice, I think killing her off made sense because it does give Arondir and Theo, first of all, have the chance to work out whatever their relationship was. And also it kind of gives Arondir space to leave and go be with the other elves and be more integral to that big plot, because I did want more of him in that.
Yeah.
So I'm happy he gets to do that because he's another one of my favorite characters. So
yeah, he's great. And it's going to be interesting to see what Theo does. I saw a fan theory online that he may end up becoming the King of the Dead, if you know what I'm talking about. So in The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn ends up calling on this army of the dead. And so the reason they're an army of the dead is because they were a group that had promised to help Isildur in battle. And when he called upon them to join them, they didn't come. And so he cursed them. And so they went and lived like in the mountains by themselves, kind of like slowly dying off, and then basically turning into ghosts when they did die. And so they lived in this place that became cursed because of their presence. And so it's like, okay, well, I mean, we're starting to get to the point where Isildur is going to be joining the fight. I mean, he did technically already join the fight, but, gearing up into more and more opportunities for battle for him. Are we going to see some group of people that are going to betray him and later become this army of the dead kind of thing? So, I mean, it's an interesting fan theory. We'll see how that turns out, but I thought that was one of the more interesting ones.
It would definitely have a lot of like dramatic interest because I was kind of hoping, given Theo and Isildur's budding bromance, that when Isildur goes back to Numenor, that he would take Theo with him.
Mm-hmm.
But, Theo makes the right decision for himself. He's like, no, I'm going to stay here. The village needs a healer.
Mm-hmm.
I embrace this part of me. But you get the sense that they are still buddies.
Yeah.
So obviously, if this is the last time they see each other, then it makes sense that Isildur calling on Theo for help and Theo being like, I haven't seen you in 30 years. I don't know about that. Like, not coming, that would make sense. But if their friendship continues to grow in the show,
Mm-hmm.
and then for one reason or another, when Isildur calls them to come help and they don't come,
Mm-hmm.
that would be a devastating story choice.
Exactly. I mean, you can kind of see it though, because Theo, from season 1, is torn between the darkness and the light constantly. In season 1, he found that sword and cut himself with it. And there's a possibility that got into it a little bit and is still affecting his mental judgment. And
That's
you
true.
kind of see how he's going back and forth between, should he join the other Southlander men who joined Adar's forces, or should he join those who are trying to flee that and find peace? And it's this going back and forth. And in general, the Southlanders, they're all being driven out of their homes. And I can see with the group as a whole being torn between trying to fight for your homeland versus being happy to find peace wherever you can find it. And so that's something that he's battling with. And so I could see him, initially having a friendship with Isildur and being like, yeah, I'll fight for you and, be on the side of the good. Then on the other hand, being like, well, but I still have my own personal interests that I want to fight for more.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you can kind of see that push and pull with him already. I mean, that's not to say that he will end up King of the Dead, but I mean, he could still end up being a character who constantly kind of goes back and forth and still, ultimately chooses the light. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him have that push and pull continue for a while.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it is certainly one of the more plausible fan theories I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
I heard one that was Estrid, Isildur's girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
is going to be the Witch King. And I'm like,
No,
I don't think so.
I mean, I don't want to get too much into Tolkien bashing, but he historically does not give much time to women in general. I mean, Isildur's wife is never named in lore.
It doesn't matter. She's a baby maker.
Dwarven women are very rarely mentioned. We have
Entwives
to.
went missing.
Yep. And it's like, and even like with the elves, you have Galadriel and Arwen, and like that's about it. Everybody else is a man. And then you have like the men who you've got Eowyn, and that's it.
If a character is a woman, there has to be a reason she's a woman.
Yeah.
In Tolkien.
Like she's somebody's wife, somebody's mother,
somebody's sister.
Mm-hmm.
But
even then, they don't always get named. So it's like, even with Isildur and Estrid, there's a good possibility that they'll end up getting married. Who knows? I mean, the showrunners can literally do whatever they want because she's not mentioned in lore. So,
which I guess to that point, they could make her the Witch King if they wanted to, because Tolkien's misogyny aside, and it's not even misogyny. It's just not even really thinking about women because they're not people. But Tolkien's take on that aside, there's no reason they couldn't make her the Witch King in theory.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're going to.
No, I mean, especially because the Witch King is, there's more backstory on him than any of the other 9. Because he, in lore, is a man who ended up becoming a sorcerer and, was the most powerful of these 9 men who had rings. So, I mean, I, I really don't. I think there's like a 1% chance of it being a woman. Like,
Yeah, no, I don't think that's particularly likely. So my issue with the relationship between Estrid and Isildur is if they want to pursue this, I wish they had kind of done it another way. Because the way they've got it so far is, they're trying to make it this torrid secret love triangle thing. But then she goes to Isildur and she's like, yeah, Hagen's building us a house. And he was telling us how, yeah, this is going to be great. And we're going to be in love forever. And all I wanted to do was throw up, essentially, because he's like not Isildur. And I'm like, I get it. He's the shiny new one. He's exciting. If this is truly how you feel, leave him. Leave Hagen.
Don't string him along.
Because it's not that he's a cruel man, like sworn to Adar, who like you're stuck with. He's just kind of like there. And I get that he's maybe not the most exciting man. And that's valid. If you would like something else in life, you should pursue that. But you should pursue that. You shouldn't like wait to see if you have a ride with Isildur before deciding.
Yeah, like don't let Hagen be your plan B. Don't put him on the back burner. Don't string him along just in case something comes better.
And this just feels like frustrating writing. Like they don't know what else to do, which is weird because it's not like this show is written only by men.
Yeah.
But it's like they don't know what to do with her besides have her be another man involved.
I mean, the story ended somewhat abruptly with her. So even though Isildur left and she stayed behind in Pelargir, maybe she will leave Hagen. Maybe she will take that step and not string him along, so.
I would like to see it.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll find out.
We'll find out in like 2 years, maybe.
Honestly.
I mean, this is the one show, though, where I don't totally mind the wait because they obviously have a lot of work to do, but
yeah.
It's going to be a long wait. How many Tolkien books am I going to read in the meantime?
2. I don't know. 1 a year.
Is that your prediction?
That's my prediction.
Well, in that case, I'm going to have to read at least 3 to prove you wrong.
Wow.
I was kind of disappointed by how little we saw of Isildur this season because every episode I was like, where is he? Like, what is he doing?
I wonder if it's like what they've kind of done with all the other plots, because this season, and we'll talk about it in a minute, was so elf heavy, Eregion heavy. I almost wonder if Isildur was one of those things where they just didn't know what to do with him.
Yeah. But I feel like he's obviously going to end up as one of these central characters. So you also don't want to underdevelop him. You want one of your eventual central characters to have some depth and range and backstory. And there was almost none of that this season.
I'm just like wondering if they maybe want to get all the pieces in place, like with Numenor, so they can put him there and then develop him. I don't know for sure if that was the intention, but maybe it was.
I mean, I think Numenor will be a huge plot focus for the next season for sure. So, yeah, maybe he'll get a lot more screen time.
I hope so. Nice. I hope so. That would be good.
And finally meet his brother, too.
Yes.
Yes, which name dropped this season.
Which, thank you for that, because your review mentioned him before the finale. You're like, are we going to meet this guy? And then that kind of helped me visualize the spelling.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, bless their hearts, but when they start talking about all these names, I'm like, I can't picture what you're saying for the life of me.
Yeah, for sure. I was so tired of adding all of the special accents in by the end of my reviews. There's so many accents.
The thing is, you put accents on everything and it doesn't even change how you pronounce it ultimately.
Yeah, kind of. But so I'm kind of thinking that maybe they didn't do as much with Isildur and some of the Numenorean stuff because it's going to, by necessity, be a very big deal in the next season.
Yeah, probably. Do we want to talk about the elf in the room?
Which one's the elf in the room, Galadriel
All of them.
or Celebrimbor?
All of them. That whole plot. You know who's not the elf in the room is Sauron, but...
Right. I do think that Galadriel had the most character growth this season.
Yes, I would agree.
Because in season 1, she was, definitely in her warrior era, fighting at every turn and putting herself at the front of the story all of the time because of the mistake that she made in trusting Halbrand so much. You really see her finally start to have some humility and realize that she doesn't have all of the answers all the time, that she needs to listen to counsel from other people, and that she doesn't need to be the most important person in the room. If somebody gives her a task to do, she can go do it instead of trying to steal the limelight. Because I was just so admiring of the fact that in the Battle of the Region, instead of rushing to the front lines to help everybody fight, she found Celebrimbor and he was like, I need you to do something. And she was like, okay.
Yeah.
I'll do it. So I really admire her character growth. And I don't think that she's going to put away her sword forever because there are still more big battles to come. And I'm sure that she'll be a part of those. But we very clearly see her transitioning from her warrior era into being a beacon of light, which is like how we kind of know her in Lord of the Rings, where she literally lights up sometimes. But she's seen as this shining example of the moral fortitude of the elves and what they should strive for and hope for and, what they represent as a people. And we saw that in the finale for this one, where she's dressed in a simple white garment and the lighting is such that, she's very lit up in a dramatic fashion. And so I think it's really good for her that she's becoming a bit more humble and listening to others more and really, thinking before she speaks. So I really love to see that progression with her.
I love Galadriel as a character. I find her very compelling. I find her very interesting. I do like that she is so messy. In terms of she's rash, she doesn't listen, she's like, I know best. And then, like, as you said, this season she's really learning that that's not always the case, and like when to listen and when to bargain and when to, when to do all that. If I had one frustration, and you've heard me voice this before, it's that they made so much out of the fact that, because Sauron had been in her head before, that she was extra susceptible to his influence. And they were like, he's influencing you. You've got that ring. Anytime you listen to your instinct, it's probably just Sauron in your head. And it turns out that was not the case at all. This was all her instinct. That to me is a missed opportunity for her to choose her own instinct. Yeah. Over the Sauron in her head. Like it's like Chekhov's gun never went off. They kept going, he's in your head, he's in your head, he's in your head. But she doesn't actually have to confront anything about Sauron until the finale, until they have that big fight on the cliff. Yeah. And I'm like, if you had him in your head all season long, first of all, that would have been great because we would have gotten Morfydd Clark and Charlie Vickers together more on screen, just because they have really good on-screen chemistry. However you want to read that chemistry. I certainly read it as they have the hots for one another, but obviously she's like, this is a terrible idea, but they just play off each other really well. So if you'd had that kind of mind-to-mind scene stuff happening all season, you could have just had them together more. But then also having her together, having her with Sauron at the end, having had him in her head all season long, I think would add that extra dimension to their fight, in that this is not the Sauron in my head. This is the very real thing. What does this mean? How do I interpret this? How do I fight against whatever preconceived notion I came in with? So that, I think, is the big missed opportunity of the season for me. Not that I think it doesn't work without it, just that I feel like they set up more than they paid off.
Yeah, to me, it kind of felt like everybody else was being a little bit too harsh with her, because it wasn't like she was the only one who was fooled by Sauron.
Yeah. And ultimately that's what it ended up being, was them just being like overly cautious and overly harsh. But at the same time, her relationship with Sauron in the first season is not like anybody else's relationship. They were a lot closer than
Yeah.
he got to anybody else he influenced. So I don't think it would have been an undue concern to be like, well, you got closer than anybody, so you have more reason than anybody to be careful.
Yeah.
Where I thought that was going. And then ultimately they were like, no, actually it was in fact a reasonable amount of concern.
Yeah. Yeah. They could have maybe played the nuance of that a little bit better.
Now that said, rest of it was really well done.
Mm-hmm.
And what we got was really well done.
Mm-hmm.
This is just how I like would have liked to see it done instead.
Yeah, I think that the trick is the two actors have really great on-screen chemistry, but story-wise, you can't necessarily have them be together all the time because they're in different places doing different things.
That's
So it's
why I
kinda
thought
tricky.
like the in-head connection is a way to have the
Mm.
actors play off each other while the characters are physically still in different locations.
Yeah.
So they don't, because I understand why Galadriel is physically not in the same space as Sauron until the
Yeah.
finale. But
I mean, we could still potentially see a little bit of that because she was stabbed with his crown, and it's possible that that wound will never really go away and that it still has like a little touch of darkness to it that she has to be constantly prepared for, essentially,
yeah,
and
could
is
be.
constantly connected to him with.
I would like to see it. I thought that's what we were getting when, like, I think it was in episode 2.
Mhm.
She has a flash of a vision of what Sauron's up to, and I'm like, oh, so she's gonna be able to like see him, and maybe one day he'll, like, because he turned around and looked at the camera, so maybe he'll see her. But that's
No.
not where that went. But that's okay.
Yeah. Well, who knows? We'll see. It'll be interesting to see how much screen time they get together because they certainly are great on screen together.
Yeah, exactly. I would simply like to see more of it.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of other interesting elf stories going on too. I mean, Elrond also goes through a huge journey.
He's also got a great arc this season
Mm-hmm.
of just I never thought Elrond would feel young and innocent until I saw
Mm-hmm.
that all of that was lost this season.
Yeah.
Because he was, the strategist and he was involved. It's not like he was the
Yeah.
elf equivalent of a teenager.
Right.
He was definitely involved in the
Yep.
first season, but this time because his involvement kind of pulls him out of his comfort zone and
Mm-hmm.
onto the battlefield, he really sort of came of age in season 2.
Yeah, I feel like he loses any innocence that he still had.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He just goes through so much.
Mm-hmm. Poor guy. But I mean, everybody goes through a lot. In this
Yeah,
season.
they do.
He really has to battle how he feels about the rings. I mean, I think he still doesn't particularly like them,
No.
but he sees the value that the elven rings have. So
He ends up wearing one
briefly,
at the
yeah.
end of the season, very briefly. So I think, yeah, like you said, he sees the value in it and that it did help him save Galadriel's life. But given the choice, he wants nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Well, he will end up with one of the rings more permanently later.
But not for a bit.
Not for a little while.
Gil-galad's ring, right? That he gets.
Yep. When Gil-galad dies in battle against Sauron, then Elrond will take his ring.
Haha, oops.
Yep.
Well, that's gonna be
rip in advance to Gil-galad, who will not survive to the Lord of the Rings era.
Well,
I feel like we didn't see him very much at all this season. He was kind of barely there. And I was even really surprised in the Battle of Eregion how he wasn't right there next to Elrond leading the charge. I found that really odd. But then
yeah.
I think there was like a throwaway line at some point that the king should never be on the front lines because you don't want to risk him getting killed that quickly. So I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess I can kind of see that.
They're
But I guess
explaining his absence.
yeah, but I guess I'm just so used to seeing other battles in the Lord of the Rings with the king on the front line, like the King of Rohan and Aragorn and, leading the charge all the time.
I wonder if that was like because this is still peacetime and like Sauron's thing is new.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Lord of the Rings, like with Theoden, with Aragorn, with all that, it's desperate times.
I guess
Because
so.
then too, like they're really making a big thing out of the fact that I know, God, I forgot his name. The Steward of Gondor,
Yeah.
Boromir's dad.
Yeah.
Totally forgot his name, but I know he's not the king. But wasn't it not like a big deal that he wasn't involved in the battle at all?
Oh gosh, probably.
So I feel like the mentality of that changes as things become more desperate. What is his name?
I'm trying to look it up right now.
Denethor. That's Boromir's dad, Denethor.
Yeah, I mean, I would never expect Denethor to go into battle.
No.
But yeah, so I guess it was kind of like a strategic thing, but it just surprised me how little we saw Gil-galad in general, because we pretty much only saw him at the end.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess we did see him at the very beginning when they were kind of like strategizing. He was there in like the planning committee, but I mean, that was still pretty brief. So, I mean, I hope we see more of him because, like, as we know, he doesn't necessarily live a super long time.
I feel
So
like
I'd like to see more of him.
wasn't a ton for him to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, there's so many characters to keep track of, and he didn't have a lot to do. So hopefully he'll have more to do in the next season.
I hope so. So then that leaves us with
Celebrimbor.
Poor Celebrimbor.
My gosh, sweet baby boy. I just want to give him a hug.
I know. He was just all he wanted to do was make some art.
I know. He just wanted to be remembered for making the most exquisite jewelry. And you know what? Good for him. But unfortunately, it didn't work out very well.
It's so sad to watch because we know what's happening the whole time. We know that Sauron posing as Anatar. We know exactly who he is. We know what he's doing. We know why he's there. Celebrimbor doesn't know any of this.
Yep.
Which I forgot going into season 2. I, for some reason, thought Celebrimbor was in the room when Elrond realized that he was Sauron.
No.
He wasn't. So when he shows up, he goes, I'm actually not Halbrand. I'm Anatar. And he's like, oh! I'm like, no! But
honestly, I feel like a lot of it is kind of Galadriel's fault because I'm not sure if she like fully realized that Halbrand was Sauron, but she certainly knew that he wasn't a king of the Southlands. And she had the opportunity to tell Celebrimbor that before she left Eregion, and she didn't. She only said, do not treat with him. She didn't say why.
Which maybe she should have.
Obviously.
Do not treat with him. He's Sauron. I will come explain. Like, when it's life or death and you have to send a message, give the pertinent info immediately.
Like, she was there. She was in Eregion, and that's when she learned who Sauron was, and she didn't tell anybody.
She's embarrassed.
Obviously she was embarrassed.
No, she's embarrassed, and I'm like embarrassed for her that she can't tell them. And I get it. It's a tough conversation to have. But like, I was swayed to the dark by Sauron's pretty eyes. I get it. But why do you think that not telling them is going to be better?
I feel like this is the only point where I'm like legitimately annoyed with the compressing of the timeline, because Celebrimbor being swayed by Sauron and his Anatar form should not hinge on whether or not they can get a messenger to him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or just pinning it on the fact that Galadriel was embarrassed. That's kind of like a cheap shot at her, kind of, you know what I mean? Because it was more complicated than that. In reality, when Anatar came, it wasn't like somebody who was obviously the same actor in different hair and makeup. You know what I mean?
It's supposed to be somebody completely different.
He looked completely different and was completely unrecognizable. And to the point where I think it's very likely, if not extremely likely, that Galadriel had seen him as Annatar and did not recognize him. Of course, in lore, Halbrand isn't really a thing either. But point being that nobody was supposed to recognize him at all. So the fact that the plot hinges on Galadriel not telling Celebrimbor that Halbrand is Sauron, it's just very weak plot point to tie all of this together.
I get that eventually if they had just been like, Halbrand's gone, thank God, because turns out he was Sauron and now Sauron's recouping somewhere. Anyway, coincidentally, Celebrimbor now has this Valar working with him. Probably could have worked, probably would have also necessitated like a huge stretch of the imagination.
I mean, honestly, the best way to do it would have been to recast him and have a completely different actor play Annatar.
I think that would have been, first of all, very confusing for the audience. And second of all, when you have chemistry that good, you don't give it up.
No, I mean, I totally understand why the showrunners did it that way, and I don't necessarily disagree with that choice. But we did have a completely different actor play Sauron at the end of his Morgoth days.
Which was so funny to me. Which also was funny to me because one of Elrond's friends kind of looks like that Sauron. So when I saw him towards the end, I did a little jump scare.
You're right. I know who
I'm
you're
like, is this
about.
a purpose or do you two just happen to look alike?
I think it was happenstance, yeah.
But that was just very funny to me. But Celebrimbor's arc was a tragedy in real time.
Yes.
Is what it was. Because you're kind of watching every conceivable thing go wrong at every possible step. And then when things do go wrong in a really frustrating way, like he's like, wait, no, that guy is Sauron, guards arrest him. By that point, you have seen him be unhinged enough that you understand why nobody trusts him.
Yep.
It was devastating, but R.I.P. Celebrimbor.
And poor Mordania. I felt so bad for her.
Oh my God. All Mordania did was have a crush and look where it got her.
Oh, poor thing.
Yeah.
Celebrimbor scenes were definitely the most heartbreaking of the entire season. It was so hard to see him. But, I mean, I also just really admired his bravery at the very end. Like, literally being shot with arrows, and yet he's just like, you're an idiot. Basically. Standing up to Sauron while being tortured and, like, calling him on his hypocrisy and foretelling what's going to become of Sauron in the future, essentially giving this prophecy that's destined to become true.
It could have been so corny because at one point he calls him Sauron, the Lord of the Rings. And it could have been so corny to just get a title drop mid-death scene. But kudos to Charles Edwards' performance.
Yes, it was so good.
It comes off tragic. It comes off like the title of this franchise is an insult.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Because he was definitely mocking him when he said that.
Because when he's like, I'm Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. And he's like, you're Sauron, the Lord of the Rings. Like, this is all you are, and these rings will be your undoing.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
it was so good. Yeah.
It was also the thing I not enjoyed, because it was hard to watch, but that I thought was really cool was the way, we all know that Sauron has really gotten into Celebrimbor's head, but at the same time, that's the side we mostly see, but then we see how well Celebrimbor's gotten into his, that he's like, I'm going to artificially keep you alive until the orcs get here or whatever, like for prolonged torture, but he knows exactly which buttons to push to like upset him enough that he just kills him and he just can go from there. And he gets exactly what he wants.
Yep. I think that about covers the elves.
Which means I think that covers the season.
I mean, unless you want to talk a little bit more about Sauron's journey.
Yeah, we can.
We've kind of like danced around him this whole time.
Listen, I can fix him.
Absolutely.
But listen, all of that aside, because I swear I'm getting a reputation as a bimbo. that aside, I do think it's interesting the way they can shade his evil.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's never cartoonishly evil. But it's always just dancing along the line of you can kind of see where he's coming from.
Yeah, I really love how they portrayed him as thinking that he's doing the right thing. I mean, obviously he's never going to see himself as the bad guy, but in a lot of epic fantasy stories, it's this battle between good and evil, but good and evil is not a binary, it's a spectrum. And I think that's true for everyone, including Sauron, because even though I don't think he ever like actually fell in love with Galadriel, right? But he was entranced by her, and he did feel some sort of friendship with her, whatever aspect of that you want to call it. There was something there, and he has shown some like minuscule levels of compassion for people. It's not like he's incapable of showing care for others, but it's like, he's not 100% evil. He is just more influenced by the darker side of his nature than most people are.
See, I think like I'm sort of on the same line, but I think he did fall in love with Galadriel, but I think the inclination towards his own self-interest and his own goals and his own whatever was just stronger.
Yeah.
Like so much stronger that he didn't feel that love worth sacrificing his own ambition for.
I almost think that he started to love her in a way because he saw himself in her. I mean, she even got to the point of saying, sometimes people confuse me with darkness that I'm trying to fight, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, she is ambitious. She is a fighter. She is out there doing what she wants with purpose and clarity, or at least clarity in her mind is clarity, whether or not other people think it is. And a determination that most people don't have. Most of the elves are relatively content to just live peaceful lives in the woods or what have you. And she is out there against all odds trying to do what she thinks is the best thing to do. And I think he probably sees himself in that. When he, was first born or whatever, he was not an evil creature. He was not a demon. He was not an underworld something or other. He was a normal person essentially who wanted good, peaceful things, and slowly over time became corrupted. Started even Morgoth originally started with a plan of bringing a unity and peace to Middle Earth and became corrupted. And since Sauron was his apprentice, essentially, drug Sauron along with him, and they both became corrupted and evil. But they didn't start out that way. Everybody has a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes when we think about Sauron, we only think of him as, that great big eye.
Yeah.
And he's just the embodiment of evil. That's all he is. It's all darkness all the time. But there's more nuance there. There's more depth there. And so that's something I really appreciate about this show, is that it's showing us that nuance. And not only with Sauron, but with Adar too.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, we think he's a villain because he's working with the Uruk, but he's trying to be a leader for people who are chronically misunderstood.
Yeah. And even Adar's approach with the Uruk, when they're like, but if you send us there, we're all going to die. And he's like, well, better to die there than be slaves to Sauron or whatever. All they're hearing is, well, just go die then, which is not great to them.
Yeah.
But for him, he's intimately familiar with the alternative.
Yeah.
So to him, this is the better alternative.
Yeah.
But he has not explained that to them. They don't see that the way he does. So he's caught in that position of, yes, I know this is what's better for you.
Mm-hmm.
But he's like, but there is no way to convey that without seeming like he doesn't care and without seeming like a villain. And I think that's ultimately what contributes to Adar's downfall.
Yeah. And I mean, it very well could be that the Uruk after this supremely regret what they did in killing him. Because it's like, they're going back to what's familiar to them with Sauron, but Sauron clearly does not care about them.
No.
Yeah, it's tragic for the Uruk and their story. But again, like, everything is a spectrum. I don't think that they're all evil either. Like, they clearly have families and care about each other. And I think that they could have been content to go back to Mordor with Adar and just lived, on their own in peace in their own little corner of the world and not really bothered anybody. But they're not given that chance. They're forced into this generations long war for Sauron and, originally Morgoth against their will, basically. And, that's just how things shake out for them. But that doesn't mean that they're 100% evil either.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But the
Basically, we
season
like
does...
the shades of villains in this show.
Yeah, I do. I do really like the shades of villainry. And then we end this season on a really positive note.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really lovely too. It's not named in the show, but they end up in Rivendell, all the elves.
Yeah. It's not quite a settlement yet. It's just some trees on a cliff.
Yeah.
But they basically have to decide whether they want to retreat and regroup or rally and continue the fight.
Yep.
And they decide to continue and to fight on. And it's a really nice, empowering moment. It's a really beautiful visual. It's the 4 elf leaders standing with the survivors of Eregion all gathered there.
Yeah, it felt like mildly anticlimactic to me, but I don't think it was supposed to be climactic necessarily. I don't know.
I think because season 1 ended on, oh my god, it's Sauron. Anything that wasn't, oh my god, it's Sauron, was inevitably going to feel anticlimactic a bit.
Right, yeah.
But
that's fair. Yeah, I guess I was maybe slightly annoyed because Galadriel was talking about how we need to remember Celebrimbor's words about how it's not about being strong, it's about being a part of the light. And then they immediately decide to keep fighting. And I feel like that's slightly contradictory.
I feel like for her, I was trying to puzzle this out too, what she meant by that. And I think maybe the interpretation is that they are not fighting for revenge or fighting for themselves, for their personal gain, for whatever. They're fighting because stopping darkness is the right thing to do.
That's fair.
That's my interpretation. I don't actually know if that's what they meant by it, but
that makes more sense to me than what I was thinking about. So
what were you thinking?
Well, just that it didn't really make a lot of sense because she's like literally this beacon of light in her white dress and the sunlight hitting her just so, and then talking about fighting. So it's like, well, which one is it, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's also kind of both.
Yeah.
Because you can't really pursue peace and light without having to fight for it.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
I also enjoyed the music this season.
Yes.
It's really good. All the camera work. I don't know all the terms for things, but it was great.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. I enjoyed one micro moment I really liked was in the last fight with Sauron and Galadriel. He changes his face a bit, so we get to see Halbrand come back. He disguises himself as Galadriel, as Celebrimbor, and particularly for those last two, the way that Morfydd Clark and Charles Edwards hold their faces and their body language was so Charlie Vickers coded.
Yeah.
It was chillingly well done.
Yeah, it was so good.
It doesn't feel like parody. Like they're obviously not making fun of him. They're just trying to capture his energy. And I think they did that really well.
Yeah.
So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, that was really fun. I was thinking too of like a micro moment just being Anatar's little hair bows.
Like he wakes up every day and he's just
making a little bow in his hair.
Do we think he looked at an Instagram tutorial? Probably.
Oh my goodness. You know that if this was like a modern day thing, he would be on all the fashion blogs.
Get ready with me to go gaslight this blacksmith.
Because I mean, he looked impeccable the entire time.
Oh, 100%.
That makes me hope that when he eventually gets his like black armor, I hope that it's very detailed up close. Because that would be like, you know, on par for his character to have a really like extra set of armor.
I hope so. That'd be nice. Also, speaking of micro moments, I don't know what Elendil and Muriel were doing, but there was a lot of forehead touching and like chest touching and heaving breaths. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
More, please.
So much more. What are we doing here? I'm like, it's the only reason you're not kissing because the Aryan won't go away. Like, she's just standing there staring at them.
Well, you know, I'm hoping that in the next season we'll see Celeborn finally, and so maybe we can get some more kissing there.
Yeah, where is he? He's like missing.
He's
on gap
missing.
year.
He's missing, presumed dead. Apparently.
I guess so.
I mean, that'll be a really interesting character moment for Galadriel to see him come back.
Mm-hmm.
And the writers can't write him out because
He needs to be there.
he has to father a child with Galadriel.
Which I did see a lot of people online who seem to be under the impression that they'd already had their daughter. And I'm like, this does not read to me like a woman who's got a kid at home.
No, because she would have mentioned the kid.
She would have mentioned it. And also she doesn't seem as if she had somebody depending on her that she would be as reckless as she is.
Exactly. I also see it more as like, you know, she's transitioning from warrior to beacon of light, in that now moving into that, you know, next era of her life is when she's going to have the patience to settle down and have a kid and build a home.
Yeah. So he's got to come back because they got to have a baby. So because Elrond needs somebody to marry after having kissed Galadriel. It's Twilight all over again.
No.
That was my first and only thought was welcome back, Bella and Jacob.
Oh no.
I mean, as long as he doesn't take one look at the baby in Galadriel's arms and be like, oh my God, my soulmate, then we're probably fine.
I really, really, really hope that Elrond sees very little of this girl as she's growing up, because if he is there constantly when she's growing up, it's going to be very creepy when he marries her.
He's going to be setting up Rivendell. Galadriel's going to go elsewhere and have her baby and show up with her grown-up daughter. Like, this is Elrond. He's going to be like, oh my God.
I hope so. That's in my head. That's how it's going to be, because I really don't need Elrond to be a groomer.
No, we don't want that. Not in this house.
So hopefully we'll see Celeborn next season.
Anything else about season 2?
I guess not.
We kind of talked about what we want to see in season 3 as well. So do you want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
If you want to read my predictions for season 3, then go to the website and read my episode 8 review. It's at the end.
Amazing. So in that case, Chelsea, where can everybody find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and Tumblr at Chelsea Fairless. And of course, as we mentioned before, I am the host along with Arezou of Wormhole Waffles, a Stargate podcast. So please feel free to join us over there if you are so inclined.
Sweet. So I'm on Twitter at Arezou at RZD2 on Threads and Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky at arzuamin.bluesky.social, but do I use it? Absolutely not. As a network, we're on Twitter at geeky_waffle. We are the Geeky Waffle on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Tumblr. We're the Geeky Waffle on YouTube. We're at thegeekywaffle.com, and we're on patreon.com/thegeekywaffle. So thank you all so much for listening, and stay geeky.